Ask for more bread, bro. I'm gonna put your fucking ass in squats. This just gives you a piece of one day of Benji's life that he had to live over and over again for the last 10 months of his life. What this shows you is that him requesting, asking the things that he needs to survive, they're gonna hold consequences. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through with you the state's witnesses, how this fits ultimately, and what the state needs to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. So I'm going to go through all of these a little bit one by one, and point out the evidence to you that you should be considering. First we have Julia Center. She saw Miranda carrying Benji. Benji looked very thin. This woman has kids of her own. She knows what kids should look like. She couldn't believe that the child was almost 5 years old. So again, a normal person, a person with kids, knows that this kid is small. He's tiny. He's very thin. What she tells you is that Benji is still breathing. She has that sensory detail. I went up. I touched Benji on his chest. This is not something I'm going to forget. Benji was still breathing. Which is also consistent with the 911 calls that the defense put in for you. If you listen to those 911 calls, what do you hear? The first call is, yes, he's still breathing. And why does she call back the second time to perform CPR? I'm calling back because he's not breathing now. So we know at the time that when Benji is taken down, he's still alive, he's still breathing. Also, when we look at Miranda's 911 call, she mentions that other lady who stopped me. We know Julia's there. So, Officer Rosendo Hoyos. Call him, he's the reporting officer. He saw Benji at the hospital. What is he telling you? Like everybody who's talked, except for really the defense experts in this case, that he looked very thin. Saw the bruising on his body. Then we brought you to Devin Acosta, who was the CSI in this case. Described the scene for you. Showed you those 5 locks in the kitchen. The locks and the gate in the children's bedroom. Described for you the video cameras in the kids' bedrooms and in the kitchen. And then the locked food, the food that was behind these locks was bountiful and plenty. And you have those photographs and evidence for you. You can see that all of these alleged choking hazards, apparently that these parents are trying to prevent him from getting to. What will you notice about where there are not locks? There's not locks where the knives are kept. Where do we keep chemicals in our house? Underneath the kitchen. Do those have locks on them? No. It's only the food that's locked up in this house. And when you listen to that body-worn camera statement later, you will hear from the defendant's own mouth and Miranda's own mouth, why did we put those locks on? Because he was getting up in the night and eating. Not because we were worried about him choking in the middle of the night. He was getting up in the middle of the night and eating. That's why those locks were put there. So you see this one. This is the first lock that we see in those original surveillance videos back from 6/8 of 21. This was the original lock that was on this pantry. And soon you can see through the videos that apparently the defendant figured out he could open this lock. Right? He was able to get in there and get some food. They're not going to have that. What are they going to do at that point? Then they add the exterior lock to this, to the upper cabinet, and to the fridge. I'm sorry, the fridge was already there. They changed the one on the fridge because apparently they knew he could get into the fridge. So that's what we see in this photo as well. We see that these locks on the upper pantry, the lower pantry, more specifically the upper lock, the lower lock. We see also in this one where there's a lock. Where do we not have locks in here? We don't have locks in the bathroom that's in the hallway, the kids' bathroom, where there's medication. They're not worried about that. They're worried about him getting food. So we've looked and we saw the cameras. Why would you place a camera in the kitchen? If you're sleeping at night, it's to catch Benji going into the kitchen and getting food. It's a reasonable inference. Then we see the ones in the bedroom. Where is it angled at? It's angled facing the door, right? The door where Benji is getting out on multiple nights in order for him to get some food. Then we saw the 2 locks on these doors, and Mr. D'Amico already mentioned this. You see in one of those videos, the surveillance videos, Benji, he's moving the desk. And he's moving it where? Towards the door, where the gate is, so he can pop over the gate. Well, they weren't going to have that. You have those photos and evidence where that desk is in there. It's locked. Why? To prevent Benji from getting out yet again. This defendant has placed barrier upon barrier upon barrier from Benji getting what is the most essential part of our life, food and water. I mean, just let's think about ourselves when we miss our lunch, how that feeling is. Imagine living in that constant state. That's what Benji's life is like. We see the gate at the door. We see originally that gate wasn't there, but eventually it does. It gets added there, that additional barrier for this 4-year-old, almost 5-year-old, from getting out and getting food. So we brought to you then Detective Alfred Gonzalez. He's our cell right expert. He authenticated the videos that came from the cell phone, which are State's Exhibits number 75, 78, 79, 80D, and 223. You'll have all of those in evidence if you want to look at them. It has the PDF reports with them. You can see when these videos were created. He, again, authenticated the dates that those videos were created. He authenticated the images and the dates that those came from, and those are in State's Exhibit number 76. And he authenticated those text messages. Next we have is Officer Oliver Bettis, who he's a reporting officer on July 20th of 2021. We learned why he went out. He goes out there because he gets an anonymous report that somebody is concerned about Benji. Through his investigation and through his testimony, what do we learn? That anonymous caller is the defendant's family member. Somebody who's willing to call police on their own family member because of the concerns that they see on this child. They didn't really talk to Benji and Brandon. You have the body-worn cameras in there. When they talk to Benji on the counter, where's the defendant? He's right around the corner. When they talk to Benji and they take him to the bathroom, you see the video, who's sitting on the bed? Miranda. And when they're talking there, the door's open, and who's right there still? Miranda. They never talk to these kids about it. And Officer Bettis, to his credit, what I can't give him credit for is he fell on the sword. He said, I should have done more. I wish I could have done more. Through Detective Size, you learned about Child Safe. What is the purpose of Child Safe? The setting, you're away from any potential perpetrators. These kids could have been taken to Child Safe, they could have been interviewed, but unfortunately they weren't. So through Officer Bettis, you're able to review the body-worn videos. And you can see Benji asking for food several times. And in that, every single time, not right now, or just moves him away. See, Brandon actually moved the defendant away. Remember when Detective Hale, he puts Benji, gets him, sits him up on the countertop, and the EMS is right here. What does Benji do? First he reaches for that snack, the little kids' treats. He said, oh, not right now, buddy. And then they start asking him questions, again, with the defendant right there. And what does Benji do? He doesn't really respond. He goes back because he's looking for that food, right? Something officers clearly missed. The signs were there. They just didn't pick up, and they should. What do you learn through that? You also learn through that video that the defendant and Miranda say the locks were put in the kitchen because Benji was getting out in the middle of the night and going into the kitchen. This idea that he's choking on something is just ridiculous. He's there, those locks are there to prevent him from getting food. Then we learned about Candace Sanchez, who's the defendant's sister, who called CPS on her own brother because she was concerned for Benji. What do we know from her? That Benji, she used to babysit Benji, and that when Benji was in her care, he ate well. Normal developing kid. Gained weight during that period of time. In fact, she had potty trained Benji during this period of time. That Benji was normally developing during this time that she was babysitting him. And then we also learned that the defendant had told her, oh, he's eating a lot. You need to take him to the doctor. Doesn't happen really until CPS gets involved. After Candace calls, and that's when you see him taken to the emergency room. Then Amy Flores. We get a timeline of where Benji was with during periods of time. Benji was with Erica from birth to about January 3rd, 2019. From January 3rd to January 6th, Benji's with Amy. And then Benji moved from her custody to go live with Danny Cervera, the defendant's father. During that period of time, same information that we had from Candace is all consistent. Benji, he had no problems eating. He had no problems gaining weight. Benji was a normal, happy, healthy, developing child. She talks about those milestones that he's reaching. Those milestones that you as parents, you as uncles, aunts, people who have grandchildren, those exciting parts of their life, when they're starting to crawl, when they're starting to walk, when they eat their first solids, all of those things. He's hitting his milestones. And then we showed her a picture because she hadn't seen Benji since he went in. And what did she say? I know that's him, but I don't recognize him. That's not my Benji. That's not the way he looked. He was plump. He liked it. So Dr. Lucifer is a board-certified pediatrician and child abuse pediatrics, former director of the Center for Miracles. He's actually authored a peer-reviewed article about starvation. This is an expert in starvation. What did he tell you? Diabetes didn't kill Benji. We talked about how you die from diabetes. That's ketoacidosis, right? No signs that Benji died from ketoacidosis. Tells you that Benji died from starvation. And that injury prior to actually succumbing to his death, that injury, the composition of his body, that starvation up and coming, that was serious bodily injury. So what do we talk about? We talk about the weight trends and the height trends. The weight trends, again, we're not looking at any particular point in time. We're looking at what's the overall trend. He's increasing until really the last 10 months of his life. Again, he was developing normally until his 4th birthday. He talks to you about the lanugo, and you have those photographs in evidence with his back. And that to him, though that hair was consistent with the lanugo is consistent with starvation. Talked about the dehydration that is, again, hand in hand with most of the starvation cases. Talked about the compulsive behavior, and we kind of have to dig through the medical records to look at it. But in it, you can see he's chewing on his fingers, right? That is that compulsive behavior that is consistent with the starvation. You also have photographs in evidence. You have photographs where he has a diaper and then he has what appears to be feces on his hands. It's a reasonable inference that at some point he's potentially eating his own feces. Talked about that lack of body fat on him, the paucity of adipose tissue. Talked about it over and over again. That there's no subcutaneous fat, that mesentery is translucent, it's see-through. And we talked about the importance of the mesentery fat, right? It's there to insulate you. It's there to protect your internal organs. It's the very important fat that you would have. And in this case, it wasn't there. And ultimately, what he tells you, I agree with Dr. Molina. Benji died from starvation. So these are the weight charts that he provided for you, and you have those in evidence, and you can look at them if you desire, and look at what ultimately his testimony is. So then we have Dr. Molina, who is the chief medical examiner of the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office. Talked to you about Benji's cause of death was starvation. His manner of death is homicide. What is starvation? Is not receiving adequate nutrition. And that starvation is not always the complete removal of food or water. Defense wants to talk about, look, there's photos and videos of him eating. We know he's eating. It's the adequacy, the enough. He's not getting enough to sustain his life. He's not getting enough, what's important in children, to grow. In fact, he's not growing. His body, by weight, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller when it should be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Tells you that if Benji would have received proper medical care prior to his death, he may not have died. Talk to you about what serious bodily injury is. In this case, it's the death, it can be, but can it also be that weight loss prior to death? That injury, that bodily injury that creates a substantial risk of death, right? So leading up to his death, even that is serious bodily injury. Tells you about what the autopsy process is. It's not just opening it up, looking at his body, externally and internally. It's that death investigation that comes along with it. And what she reviewed all of Benji's medical records, went through, made sure, subpoenaed the health insurance company, make sure we have all of the claims, make sure we can know where he went, where he was doing, what he looked like, what he weighed, because we don't want to leave any stone unturned. We want to make sure we understand what is this kid going through. So, talked about the cause and manner, what supports your evidence. The precipitous weight loss. You can see in State's Exhibit number 111, which is the graph, that last bit of his life, month and a half, that's really quick decline in his weight. Talks about his BMI, which according to the CDC, which again is based on the United States, the population of the United States, talking about his peers here who live here, who have the same access to food and nutrition, that it's in less than the first percentile. Talked about that lack of subcutaneous fat, the translucent mesentery, the collapsed small intestines and large intestine. Essentially every expert here says, what does that mean? Well, it means that he hadn't eaten for a period of time. There was no food. Talked about that thymus involution, that at this age she would expect it to have seen it. And what do we know? It wasn't there. It had completely disappeared. And she talked to you about what's the significance of that. It's an extreme stress situation that you need to be in, child needs to be in for invalid. What that stress situation be? Clearly starvation that he's been going through for the last 10 months of his life. Talked about the macrocytic anemia. That's not just there on the day of the labs that's run on his death. Those are the labs also prior to that when he goes to CHOSA on 7/21 of 21. That macrocytic anemia is even there. We see those early signs of the vitamin deficiency, which again is consistent with the starvation. Talked about the weight trends during this period of time. Again, tells you it's not an individual point that matters. It's the trends. What are we looking at? We're looking at the overall picture. Talked about the low protein and albumin, what the significance of that is. He's not getting enough protein, and that, again, is consistent with the starvation. Again, no difference in the opinion with Dr. Lucifer. There's the growth chart for you. You can see normal trend even jumps up close to the 25th percentile. And then that last 10 months of his life, we see beginning a slow decline, but then at the very end, a very quick decline in his weight. So what serious bodily injury includes? Is bodily injury that creates a substantial risk of death, bodily injury that causes death, serious permanent disfigurement, protracted loss or impairment of the function of any bodily member or organ. So in this case, SBI can be the weight loss prior to his death and his death. Doesn't have to be just his death. They want to focus a lot on, well, he didn't die from starvation. Take it out. Take it out. The weight loss itself created a substantial risk of causing death. We have Detective Size, who's a lead investigator, who interviewed the defendant. He interviewed witnesses. He had Brandon Jr. complete a forensic interview, and then he got a search of the cell phone, which revealed a lot of information, which is in front of you in this case. So review the cell phone videos and photos, shows Benji wasting away during this period of time. And again, based on the cell phone and who he's with, remember, he is with the defendant from January of 2019 on. When does the starvation start? About 10 months prior. So even before that, when he's gaining weight, we don't have photos of that because we would have to get it from the defendant. So with photos we have, he's already in the process of losing weight at the very beginning. That April picture that I've showed you, that is a period of time where he's already losing weight. We get to watch Benji begging for food. And then at the end of it, you get the result of his investigation, which is that the defendant is charged with injury to child causing serious bodily injury. So talk about the surveillance videos for a second. We have one from the kitchen. So what do we see? We see Benji getting out to eat at night. And then we see the escalation of barriers to get to the food. We see videos where the gate's not there, and then we see the next one where the gate's there. So we can timestamp essentially when these things are happening. We can see, as far as the bedroom kitchen, we can see the timing of the gate. We can see Benji crying at night for milk and for water. When you look at State's Exhibit number 80B, which the defense already went through you, what is he asking for that night? He was crying for water. The defendant knew he was crying for water. That's what that shows you. It shows you that he knew what was happening with Benji. Because he heard it that night, and it's referenced in their argument the night before Benji dies. Shows in some of these videos that Benji is isolated. Not just in some of the videos is he alone, but look at the conditions in which they live. Leo and Brandon Sr., they have real beds. What does Benji have? He has a dirty mattress on the floor. This kid is treated differently than the other kids. So we see Benji trying to get out for food. He's climbing the fences. He's moving objects to get over. This is a smart kid. He knows what he has to do. He knows that he has to wait until his parents fall asleep at night in order to sneak out and get food that he needs. What do we also see? We see in one of those videos Brandon taking Benji back into the bedroom, probably because he snuck out and he was trying to get some food, puts him in there. What does he say? Shut the fuck up. Why? It's probably because Benji's been crying that night for food and water. But what's his response? Again, like many things we've seen, cry for more bread, bro, and put your fucking ass in squats. Or what? Shut the fuck up. Then we have the phone videos. So we see Benji have consequences for asking for food, and this is 4 days prior to his death. The other video, which is 3 days prior to his death, what do we see? We see Benji shaking, right? Dad, can I have some bread? So if he's having trouble gaining weight, why is the defendant punishing him for asking for food?
Your Honor, objection. That is not evidence anywhere.
Ladies and gentlemen, you will remember the evidence from the testimony of the witnesses as you heard it during the course of the trial. What the attorneys say is not evidence.
So why is the defendant punishing him and asking for food? That's clearly, Benji has consequences. That is the ask for bread again, or I'm going to put your fucking ass in squats. If they're going to say that, well, he's having trouble gaining weight, why are you putting locks on the kitchen? Why are there punishments for asking for food? It proves that the defendant's knowledge of Benji's condition and the lack of his food and nutrition. We know that the night before his death, Benji was crying and asking for water. And then the night before, the defendant tells Miranda to just put Benji in the room and walk away. So we see these text messages, and they're a little bit hard to read, but you have them in evidence for you. But and defense went through for a little bit. What does he say? Just give him a piece by piece. He don't need to eat dinner. Just give him the bread, and we won't give him anything else. If you're really concerned about him eating bread, and that's all he's eating, and that he might be choking on bread, then why wouldn't you let him have dinner? It makes no sense. He knows what he's doing. He knows the consequences of his actions. So the defense strategy to me, in part, seems like this. It's the Wizard of Oz theory. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. Don't look at what's clear evidence in this case. You got to ignore it. We got to spin it some weird way. We see these two pictures. These are 4 months apart. 4 months apart. And they want to have experts take the stand. And to me, they lose credibility when you can't say this kid looks different, right? There's something wrong with him. Clearly there is something wrong with him. He is losing weight. You can just look at his face. You can look at his legs. It's clear. It doesn't take an expert to tell you that. And we see this video from the night of his death, where he's crying and he's begging. In this video, you have it in evidence.
And objection, Your Honor, the statement of when it was from, it's not the night.
This is from the day that he died, where you see on 8/17/21 where he's asking for bread in the car. And what does she tell you? If he's filming it, just send it to Brandon. We have this video. Remember, he's eating bread, and in this one, what do you hear him say? Cry for more bread, bro, and I'm gonna put your fucking ass in squats. Oh, he's doing that for his own benefit. What benefit? This kid is losing weight. Then we see this one, where Benji's shaking. And I can't imagine what's going on in his head, because the day before, what happens? When he cries for bread, this defendant tells him he's going to put his ass in fucking squats. So imagine the courage this trial has to have to ask for bread again the next day. So what are the defensive theories? Benji didn't die from starvation. Basically, he's not malnourished enough. He doesn't look skinny enough. Apparently, these experts can look at a kid and tell him that he died from starvation. So they don't even apparently need to even review the medical records. They can just look at a kid. That Benji died from type 1 diabetes. And the defendant took Benji to a doctor, and they didn't say anything about his weight. So I want to talk about these a little bit more, and then the Benji had behavioral issues. So Benji didn't appear starved. What do we know from the evidence in this case? That kids with Benji's same BMI Z-score have starved to death. We know that from Dr. Lucifer. We know that from Dr. Christensen. Dr. Christensen, I'm going to go to him a little bit later. But even in his own evidence, there have been kids with higher BMIs, higher degrees of the criteria of malnourishment, according to the test that he likes to use, that have died from starvation. There's no lethal limit as it relates to starvation. That there's kids with Benji's same or higher Z-scores, BMI, that have died from starvation. And again, why, according to them, apparently you don't need to do an autopsy in order to say it's a kid is starved to death. You can just look at him. To me, it insults your intelligence as jurors. Your individuals, you can look at photographs and you can see that this kid is wasting away. Again, looking at these photos, it's clear he's wasting away. Type 1 diabetes. Benji did not have type 1 diabetes. Even the defense own expert who told you, Dr. Gebhardt, didn't have type 1 diabetes. We don't see any of the islet dropout in the pancreas that would be associated with type 1 diabetes. No ketoacidosis. There's no acetone in the blood. The symptoms that they want to say are type 1 diabetes, eating, and thirst, guess what they are? They're also symptoms of his starvation. Medical professionals missed the starvation. So, let me pause this one. Go back to this. Talk about behavioral issues. And, so what? Kids with behavioral issues, they don't deserve to be starved to death. Depriving them of food and water, it's not appropriate discipline. And depriving them of food and water doesn't solve those behavioral problems. I don't know why it keeps being brought up, the behavioral problems, but it's not relevant in this case. And these are the behavioral problems, I guess, that we're talking about. What do we see? Benji, the good big brother, bringing Leo is something to drink that night. And again, this is a period of time where he's already losing weight. This terrible kid's treating his brother like a brother. So, starvation, signs of starvation. Go through all of these. And what do we have in common? His precipitous weight loss, his BMI, lack of subcutaneous fat, translucent mesentery, all of these things. No defendant's witness can explain why it's not starvation. They just want to say, well, maybe it's something else, right? They just want to put maybe, hopefully you'll latch on to maybe a little bit of doubt. But none of it is consistent with the evidence. So I want to talk about Dr. Christian and his credibility. You got to check, he's got an opinion for you. Charges $600 an hour. My God. At this point, he has billed over $18,000 for his testimony. That was so far. That didn't even include his testimony, his flight here, anything like that. What do we know? While he was an ME, he's double dipping. He's also double dipping while his lab is unaccredited. because he's doing consultation work on the side. This guy's about the money. The Utah Medical Examiner's lack of accreditation. They lost it in 1995, and they didn't regain it until 2004. It's almost 30 years this ME's office did not have an accreditation. It's 29 years. And during that period of time, it was essentially his whole time that he was chief medical examiner until the very end, that he was running an unaccredited medical examiner's office. And when did he regain it? He regained it when Dr. Molina, the Bexar County chief medical examiner, went to go inspect his lab, because they rely on her for accrediting these types of labs. So, lack of credibility. You should show him photos and he wants to, oh, what about the angles? Oh, maybe his mouth is like this. And come on, man. It's an easy softball question for you, but you want to just fight about everything. You're not going to tell me he's losing fat? He looks smaller? He doesn't know the long-term effects of malnutrition. But what was he quick to say? It's not SBI. Okay, what are the long-term effects? I don't know. But you know they're not SBI? They're not serious bodily injury? It's because it fits his narrative. He has to come here. He's testifying for the defense. Well, I have to say it's not serious bodily injury. I don't have no idea what the long-term consequences are, but I can tell you that they're not serious bodily injury. Okay. He also testified to you about what serious bodily injury. He said it's not serious bodily injury, but he didn't even know what serious bodily injury was under Texas law. It's kind of important to know, wouldn't you think? So, he talked a lot about this Medea literature, and he relies on it, by his own admission, to a significant degree in ultimately reaching his opinion. He said that states nearly all cases are severe, but almost 1/4 of the cases he cites were not. It's almost 25% of the cases he said that he cites actually were not what he said. That's like when you ask your kid, they go home, take a test. How'd you do? I got nearly all of them right, and then they got a C. Okay? That does not make sense. One case, and I'm sorry, it's not mild, one case was actually normal in which a person died, a child died from starvation in what the own literature that he's citing. Own literature he's citing saying there's no threshold for lethal starvation. Using this test is just a tool. It helps look at these things. It might give you from perspective, but again, it does not provide a lethal threshold for starvation. Long saying, but no simple anthropometric measure provides degree of risk in children. Weight alone is simplest and most reasonable marker. That's what that report said. We talked about it. The weight alone is the simplest and most reasonable marker of whether a child is at risk for starvation. We know Benji's weight. We know his trends of weight. That different criteria, methods can provide different results. Using one test, he could be mild versus another test, he might be severe. These are all over the place. And that Waterloo tells us that you can die from mild, moderate, and severe malnutrition. You can even die under Waterloo with a normal level of nutrition.
10 minutes.
And that Benji is moderate under Gomez and mild under Waterloo. So, besides some other things for you, but most importantly, that last bullet point is misdiagnosis of abuse and neglect because of carelessness towards children, and records by health and social workers have been reported in the literature. And guess what? It got reported to you in this courtroom for the past 2 weeks. We have carelessness of law enforcement, of CPS, and medical throughout him that failed Benji in his life. So, essentially what he goes through, and he tries to downplay all the positive findings, but then he also doesn't really provide any other reasons why these things might exist. Yes, the lack of the transparent mesentery, that's losing weight. Yes, he did lose weight, but provides no other explanation for it to you than it just can't be. Just can't be. Wants to talk about suffocation, and there's no evidence to suggest this is a possible cause. Going back to Julia's center and the 911 call, what do we know? He is breathing at the time that they encounter him. From both Miranda, we know that, from Julia. It's not suffocation, ladies and gentlemen. Seizure. No evidence suggests it's a plausible cause of death. Again, the literature does not support Dr. Christensen as it relates to your first seizure can be your deadly one, because there's no way to test for it. We know from the 911 call from Miranda that Benji has never had a seizure before. It's not reasonable. The arrhythmias. Again, no evidence to suggest this is a possible cause of death. He did not have an arrhythmia prior to his death. And the genetic testing that they want to allude to, it doesn't show you anything other than he's predisposed. It doesn't show that he had one, that he died from one, he ever suffered from one. Talk about Gephardt just for a second. He's done 0 autopsies, so him and I have done the exact amount of autopsies. Him and every single one of you have completed the exact amount of autopsies. He's had 0 kids in his care that have died from starvation. He has 0 experience in lethal starvation. He's expected to be paid from $7,000 to $8,000 for his testimony here today. He acts like he's wanted doing it out of his goodwill, but there's a check behind it. His theory about weight loss due to dehydration, it's misleading. He doesn't take into account the fact that this child's diaper is soiled already. There's the water weight that he wants to say, oh, well, maybe that's, you have to take the 12.7 and add it back. It's already included in there. He also assumes that Benji was not dehydrated prior to his date of death, and assumes that Benji's weight at those other periods of time, he wasn't dehydrated as well. So, again, he talks about this, he just doesn't look starved enough. The cerebral edema doesn't dispute this as a common finding in autopsy, and I'm not going to go through that whole thing we did this morning. It's like, if Dr. Medina didn't say it, it would be a problem, but now she said it, it's a problem. It's backwards. Now that Benji did not have type 1 diabetes, he was dehydrated, and what did he tell you? That preventing him from getting there, getting water and food, that would be considered child abuse for him. Talks about what are the long-term effects of moderate to severe malnutrition. Stunting, which can be SBI, heart issues, which can be SBI, liver issues, it can be SBI. These are all consequences, serious bodily injury as it relates to moderate to severe malnutrition. Catherine McKinney, I'm just going to leave it at this. Bless her heart. Okay? She wants to come here and diagnose somebody with type 1 diabetes, but she don't know what labs mean. She doesn't know what anything means. By law, she can't even tell you this kid has type 1 diabetes. I want to talk about charge of court, concurrent causation. So in order for you to apply that, you have to believe that the defendant not feeding Benji, not giving Benji fluids, and not seeking proper medical care did not cause SBI, and that only Miranda's actions were sufficient to cause SBI to Benji. So you have to show that all of his failing to act, all of it was insufficient to cause his death. All of his acts are why he's here. He is the cause of Benji's death. He is the cause of SBI. Make a mistake of fact. You have to believe the defendant's belief was reasonable. And it has to reasonably that Miranda was giving Benji adequate nutrition and hydration, and it has to negate the elements of the offense. So I want to wrap up is why we are here today. Defense and I can agree on one thing. This case is important for Benji. It's important that we do our job as it relates to Benji. The system, up until his death, it failed Benji. I can't not put it in any other way. A month before his death, this child should not have stayed with this defendant who was starving him. The signs were there. You can see his body on that day. You can see in between his ribs. You can see the signs that this kid is begging for food, and they didn't take it away. The system failed him. But that is why we have our criminal justice system. It is to vindicate his death and hold this person accountable for harming this precious 4-year-old.
5 minutes.
At the end of this case, there is only one true verdict. That verdict is to find the defendant guilty. And that is because what he did, his actions, he is responsible for this child wasting away. He is responsible. He is the parent. He should have protected this child. He should have fed this child. He should have given him what he needed. But what does he do instead? He only has consequences for what Benji needs to survive. At the end of this case, we're going to ask that you find the defendant guilty. It is the only true verdict according to the law and the evidence in this case. Thank you.